Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today for our webinar, Measure Twice, Cut Once, How Analysis Impacts Business Results. I would ask if you guys can try to look and type in a question. We want to know where you're from. Give us, make sure that question bar is working for you. Just tell us where you're dialing in from today. We'd love to know. Sacramento, I'm really jealous. Oklahoma City, Chattanooga. Wow, from all over. Wow, somebody's from Bristol, UK. Wow, welcome. Great. Well, we're going to go ahead and get going today. I'm your moderator. My name is Tina Cruz. I'm the National Account Executive. Who we are? Well, we're Bottom Line Performance. We're a custom learning solutions company founded in 1995. We focus on e-learning here. Blended learning, curriculum design, mobile solutions, and serious games are a few things in our wheelhouse. We also specialize in needs analysis and project management. It's one of our key things here. We've launched our first Lessons on Learning webinar series with today's analysis webinar. We will have another one coming up, the Agile Learning Design, coming up in April, and then we'll have more every other month. So we hope you can join us for a future webinar coming up soon. We'll be sending out the registration link for that Agile Learning Design webinar following this one. I want to introduce you to today's presenters. Today's presenters include Stephen Buller. He's our Marketing Director here at Bottom Line Performance, as well as Stephanie Sullivan. She's our Account Manager here at Bottom Line Performance, and I'll let them go ahead and jump in and introduce themselves as we continue with the webinar.
Thank you, Tina. My name's Stephen Buller. I will be carrying us through a lot of the content today, and I'm here with Stephanie Sullivan.
Hey, Steve. Hey, Tina. Yes, this is Stephanie Sullivan. I'm an account manager here at Bottom Line Performance. I work directly with a lot of our clients. And so often as we're starting to think about projects, we have the conversation, well, why analysis? And do we really need to set aside time for that in our project? And we end up spending a lot of time talking about how that upfront investment in analysis is going to ultimately impact the end project. And so we're happy to kind of bring that conversation here to a wider stage and share it with all of you today.
Awesome. So here is what we're going to cover today. We're going to start off with an activity called What's the Story, which is pretty fun, to just show how many different perspectives different people can have about the same situation. And that'll lead us into a brief discussion on why analysis is important, 3 types of analysis that you can conduct as part of a project. And then Stephanie's going to jump into those case studies for you, and we'll be giving some takeaways as we go. So what would you do if you had to design training for the role pictured on the screen? So let's imagine that this individual here is an animal technician, and you need to create new hire training for that role. This role usually has no more than an associate's degree education. Let's say they don't have access to computers or devices in their workplace. And oh, right, the turnover rate is really high for this role. So your manager might say, we need OSHA training for our new hires. The supervisors are saying that's what we really need. But it can be important to, or it is important to dig a little bit deeper and find out what the real story is. What might be causing that turnover? What is causing this role to not achieve the results that it should be achieving? So to kind of illustrate that point, we're going to do an activity here based off of Rory's story cubes. These are a lot of fun if you've never played them. So I actually rolled 3 cubes here. And so the cube to your left is going to be the beginning of the story. The cube in the middle is going to be, you guessed it, the middle of the story. And then the last cube is the end of the story. So given these symbols, type into the question area, make up a short story that has a beginning, middle, and end. So I'll give you an example here. Harry Potter found the key to the Forbidden Forest. So that was one sentence, but I used each one of the cubes. So type in your best shot at making up your own story based off of these symbols. And then Tina's going to read those off and share them with us as they come in. What are we seeing, Tina?
It does look like we have some good ones. The Crow Woman created the plains and rivers, the winds blew prairie grasses, the earth smiled. Key to magic
I love
is
the
seeing
key to
beyond
magic
the
is
forest
seeing
for the
beyond the
trees.
forest for the trees.
That's one of my favorites as well. Don't you wish that you had a key to success and you could grow as a professional at the same time?
Well, these are pretty funny. Here's another good one. Houdini hid the key to his handcuffs in his backyard. No matter, he'll escape anyway. Very nice. Okay, so hopefully you guys are kind of getting the gist, and most of you, it looks like, have put something in there, and they're really funny. And what's crazy is how very different they all are. And I think that the same is often true when starting a new project, because we're given a picture at the beginning of a project of what reality is, or what the stakeholders think reality is, and it's your job, either as a training vendor or as the internal training function, to interpret that so that you can create the right training given the business need. And that really brings me to why even conduct analysis to begin with, because your stakeholders might be saying, we need training, we need an e-learning course, or we need an ILT for our national sales meeting, or maybe somebody has fallen in love with a particular app or game that they want to integrate into their training. And they think that that is what the need is. But actually, the real need is improved performance. I think we always know that underneath that initial training need, there is some sort of desired outcome. And it's our task to uncover the specific knowledge, skills, or behavior changes that are going to be needed to bridge that performance gap. So there's a lot of factors that are internal to the performer. They have their skills, their knowledge, and training can certainly help grow those skills or increase that knowledge. But you also have a lot of things that are inherent to the performer that training isn't necessarily going to be able to impact, and some of those are listed there on the screen. But there's a whole lot of other stuff that is completely external to the performer. You have your environment, you have the organization, the resources that someone's being provided, and all this stuff is completely separate from whatever training you might create. So the model I've been showing you is David Wiley's performance model. It's a great tool. It's something that we really like to use with our clients. It's a great thing to use because stakeholders will sometimes say that they have a problem and they know that they need training for it. This model is a good way to illustrate to someone who isn't familiar with performance consulting all of those other factors that can impact performance. So what can training impact? Well, in today's blended learning world, training can impact a few of those buckets. And coaching is one overlooked area sometimes that, just developing training without the adequate coaching to support it is a miss. So there's several different areas that you might be able to target with a learning program, but certainly you're not going to be able to hit all of those areas. And sometimes there's other issues that training simply isn't going to be able to fix. So what about you? At your organization, what external factors are hurting employee performance that your training can't fix? And as those answers come in, Tina will read some of the top answers off for us here.
A lot of people are putting in lack of resources, English as a second language, pay, time to do the training, commitment to the company, management not following through, ongoing coaching or lack of coaching support, lack of consistent vision and direction, no business metrics, poor management practices. So quite a few. Yeah,
that's a lot, and that's a lot of different things too. So, we have a decent-sized group here, and it seems like people are not just all saying the same thing. We have a lot of different issues that can impact performance. So a good analysis can help figure out all those issues beforehand. So first of all, analysis, your goal is going to be to figure out what results a job is supposed to be producing, identify if it's something you can even train in the first place, or if these other factors are holding you back. Identify the results or what's going to impact your results and what is not going to, and then try to separate the fact from the opinion with all of those different stories that might be floating around about what the right solution really is. So there's certainly challenges with doing analysis. if you were going to do every type of analysis under the sun, it could take you a pretty long time. You could get in analysis paralysis mode and not actually take action. So some stakeholders might have a preconceived idea that analysis is going to take too long. We don't have 5 months to do this before we start our project. In fact, we at Bottom Line Performance typically only have a few days available with a particular project to conduct our analysis. And clients are going to have limited budget and time for that analysis phase. So the client is going to want us to decide how best to use that small bucket of time. And then there's always the risk that through our analysis, we might identify some larger organizational issues that we really aren't going to be able to fix with our learning solutions. So there's all these challenges that you have to kind of navigate and weigh when you're deciding if analysis is important to do. So there's 3 types of analysis that I want to talk about. There's needs analysis, when there is no clear problem state, or maybe there's some different opinions about the type of solution needed. There's audience analysis, for when you need to know how your employees or your customers are going to learn best. And then finally, task analysis, which is especially good when the training is for a specific role or job function. And certainly these can kind of overlap and interweave with each other, but we're going to talk about them in those 3 areas. So first of all, needs analysis. So we like to say, when we're starting a needs analysis, what keeps you up at night? What is that training need? What is that business problem underneath all of the surface level stuff? So a needs analysis is where we would want to define the project as a whole, scope it out, and get a broad cross-section of the needs to guide further analysis efforts. So the first question to ask, kind of related to that, what keeps you up at night? What problem are you trying to solve? So this is where we're looking for those behaviors that we need to change with our learners. That should lead to some sort of instructional goal. So after the training, learners are going to be able to blank and be focusing on what they should actually be able to do on the job. This next one, who are your learners? So this is somewhat related to audience analysis, but you typically, even in just a needs analysis phase, you would ask some basic information about the learners, finding out who they are, what some basic demographic information is, and that'll help guide the type of solution that you create. You'll also want to find out during the needs analysis what existing materials or documentation is associated with the project. This sounds pretty basic or self-explanatory, but taking the time to ask that question and figure out what subject matter experts you're going to need to talk to and what documents are already out there can really help determine the scope of a project. And also getting the information from the people who care about the project. What ideas do they already have for the delivery format? Maybe somebody already thinks that the right answer is e-learning. Well, even if your analysis reveals that the right answer is something else, it's still important to know that up front, to know what preconceived expectations are already floating around out there. And also, if the project is needed to address a legal or governing body requirement. For example, some of our clients have to comply with regulations that specify what delivery method is used for the training. And in those cases, certain methods like mobile or even e-learning might not be a possible solution, no matter what our analysis reveals. So identifying that at the beginning is very important. And what languages besides English are required? This is not just about scoping the cost or the duration of a project. This also impacts design decisions, such as what type of audio is going to be narrated or what type of text is going to appear on screen. And then finally, related to that what keeps you up at night question, how will you know that a project has been successful? What are your metrics? What are you looking to track? Identifying that at the beginning of a project makes everything go so much more smoothly. And then finally, this is also a pretty important question. What is the project timeline? If your product launch is coming up in 90 days, your learning solution is going to look different than if we have 9 months to put that together. But knowing that information is very, very important to getting the right solution. So that brings me to audience analysis. So this is where you're really trying to figure out who your learners are and how they're going to learn best. So typically, we're looking to find a group of peak performers that an organization already has, figure out what their role is supposed to be producing, and what's making those peak performers so different from everybody else. So in an audience analysis, we're looking to uncover information about learners that's going to impact the solution that we would recommend and ultimately create. So their education level, their job experience, their current knowledge, the work environment, different languages that they might have. To do this, we would of course be talking to the learners, but also talking to their managers and other stakeholders to gather that information. So some common methods of audience analysis, certainly job shadowing, interviews, surveys, and focus groups are all different ways that you can try to get that information about your audience. Job shadowing is very useful for uncovering what a job really entails and what challenges people really have on the job. This is a great way to see the environment that they actually work in. And it's also a way to check, because if you interview someone but then you see what's really happening on the job, those pictures can be pretty different. And also, oftentimes stakeholders will want to minimize those environmental factors that are impacting someone's job. And they might say, well, they just aren't doing what they're supposed to be doing. When you job shadow, those things are going to become very clear. Best practices for a job shadow: you're going to want to come prepared with questions, because oftentimes job shadows turn into a little bit of an interview while you're there. Always start with an open mind and don't assume that you already have the right solution going in. Have your plan in advance for what you're going to do and how you're going to collect that information. And be sure you're making employees comfortable when you're job shadowing. It can be very uncomfortable having a consultant following you around at work. You don't know what they're doing or why. So just trying to set them at ease is going to give you a better representation of what their job is actually like. For interviews, this is a great method for gathering information when you're really trying to get people's opinions, get more qualitative information, and blending it with some of the quantitative stuff that you might also be gathering. You're going to get more honest answers in an interview than you might in a group, and you can certainly get more detail. Some best practices here: don't ask leading questions. Once again, not assuming that you're driving toward a specific answer. Coming with a natural sense of curiosity and being willing to ask those follow-up questions depending on what emerges in the interview. And then also, if you're short on time to conduct other forms of analysis, you can get some good quantitative information just by asking people to rank statements or words during the interview. Surveys are a great way to gather data from a large number of individuals quickly. So in this case, you can get that quantitative data, you can spot the bigger trends, and also surveys are very useful for trying to confirm assumptions that you already have. So one piece of advice that we have here on surveys is to use simple tools. For example, we use SurveyMonkey to get our survey data. Once again, writing good questions is very important, perhaps even more important in a survey, because you don't have that personal connection with people as they're taking it. You want to think about what responses you're going to get to a question when you're writing it. And also, only asking questions you really need the answer to. That's a good one. If you send someone a really long, complicated survey, they're more likely to choose not to complete it. So really thinking through that is very important. Focus groups. So here, we do focus groups when we see how people build on each other's ideas, rather than isolating someone in an interview setting and get deeper with their individual opinions. A focus group is how you can see how a group interacts, and really sometimes different things are going to emerge in a focus group than you would necessarily get to sitting down with a single person. So you can also cover a lot more people a lot faster than you would with interviews. I think focus groups are probably second to only surveys as far as how many people you can get to in a shorter amount of time. Okay, so best practices for focus groups. First of all, we usually conduct our focus groups virtually. We simply don't have the resources, or our clients are not including that in their projects to be flying us around to talk to all these different people in person. So conducting those meetings over the phone can be very effective, as long as you're prepared to be prompting people to participate and making sure you're collecting information or feedback from everybody. You should decide up front what one or two big picture objectives you have for your focus group, and decide if you're going to be okay with rabbit trails emerging during that focus group as people go off on tangents. And sometimes those tangents will reveal what the most important information actually is. So that leads me to another activity here, an activity that we're very creatively calling 3 questions. So now I want you to imagine that you are responsible for creating a new customer training program for hospitals and labs who are using a 6-figure medical device product that your company creates. So before you get started, you're going to have to do some analysis, and that's going to involve asking questions. So the first thing that you would need to figure out here is who you need to talk to create that training. So if you could, in the question field, think about, given this scenario, who you would want to start talking to figure out what solution you need to create. And Tina is monitoring that, and she's going to read off some answers before we share what we think we would do.
Looks like we've got a couple of people saying stakeholders. That might include the people who use the devices or the people who use it. Someone in the C-suite, the designer of the equipment, those who make the equipment.
Very good.
Sales experts, me, the end users.
Yep, it sounds like the basis here. So we would want to talk to the trainers who are currently delivering this training. We'd want to look at customers of various types. So if there's different sizes of labs using this and their experiences might be different, we'd want to have a representation of that. And I think almost everybody hit on the various stakeholders involved in the project. So your next question here, so for those customers, what characteristics would you want to know about them? And once again, you can just type your answers into the question fields.
Some people are answering what type of learners they are, their learning style. Do they have current materials, experience, or maybe problems that they've been facing with the equipment? How technical they are they, familiar with similar systems? Including maybe also how many people need to be trained and the time available.
Well, it's like some of you guys have done this before or something. Those are pretty good. So some characteristics we'd want to know about the customers. Are they a new account for the organization, or are they an existing account? Once again, how big is the account? What product configuration are these customers using? I think the difference here between a lot of the answers that were given and what we have here is that and I think it's good to hit on both, is looking at both the individual learner level and also the account level for thinking of the customer as a whole laboratory and not an individual lab worker. But obviously it's important to look at both the individual learners and the customer organizations as a whole. And yes, the customer roles who operate the machinery, because with a complex product like the one we've described, there's probably multiple roles involved with doing that. So our last question here, so now you've asked questions about the customers to identify who they are. Now, we said that you should probably talk to the trainers in addition to the customers. So what kind of questions would you ask the trainers who currently give the training, or depending on what you want to answer, what questions would you want to ask those customers?
Maybe how long? What materials are they using to train? What exercises will create the best experience? Is the training effective? What gaps do you see in the training?
Yeah.
Are there questions asked during the training we've not provided the information for? Some really good ones here. What's worked in the past? Maybe also what hasn't worked in the past.
Yeah.
How are you measuring effectiveness? So great.
You guys are really good. Thanks for being a great group and participating for our activities. So here's some questions we'd want to ask the trainers. So in an ideal world, what could be done differently on site with the customers that would make your customers more confident besides just spending more time with them? In a situation like this, we might imagine that the customer wants to reduce the amount of time that their trainers are spending on site. So just trying to ask them, in a perfect world, what would be different, just to get those ideas of maybe we can drive to a couple of those things. And then also asking them, what do they spend the most time helping with on site? Because maybe that question will lead us to what tasks are currently the most difficult, or where are the failure points with this process right now. And then as for the customers, asking them what could have been done differently during their training to make them feel more confident. And then also what the most challenging tasks were. What was what did they lack understanding of when they left the training? but then also what helps them the most during the training. So you guys are great. You guys were really catching on and had a lot of good suggestions that we didn't even say or put down here, so thank you again. And that brings me to task analysis. So task analysis, you know, we've talked to the learners, we know about who they are, we know about the project as a whole and what we're driving towards, and now we're going to really break down a specific a job and look at the process steps that are going to impact learner performance. So this is where you're going to want to map the complexity and importance of every task that's being performed on the job to find those points of failure and decide what process steps you should focus on in the training. So task analysis is great for finding discrepancies between the audience feedback you've been receiving and the actual job tasks that people are really performing. So this is something that, yes, a job shadow would probably be part of, you know, as part of your task analysis. A task analysis, you'll often use some form of a task analysis worksheet to capture this information. And it's often done, as I said, in conjunction with job shadowing or an interview. So task analysis, you're really looking to see how important a task is, how often the task must be performed, and how difficult the task is to complete. So this is an example of a task analysis worksheet. You can see the categories that we have, the various tasks that need to be completed, the learner groups that have been identified, because there's obviously different roles there. And then we have those tasks rated by importance, difficulty, and frequency with a high, medium, or low rating. So I highlighted here where the tasks, we had at least 2 columns where it was very important and it was very difficult, or it's performed very frequently and it's very important. So if we were going to design training on this process here in this sample worksheet, those would probably be the areas that we would focus on first or focus on the most and try to really reinforce in the training curriculum. So that is a lot of content, and hopefully you've been asking questions as you've been going, as we've been going through. So Tina, if there's any questions, could you throw those out here to Stephanie and I?
Does anybody have any specific questions about the content we've covered? I know we just went through that question exercise. You guys were really participating. A lot of people have asked if they will be getting the slides after the presentation. We will be emailing the recorded webinar out to you. So if you've registered, you'll be getting that in the email soon. One person's asking, Gilda's asking, how do you organize your task analysis?
Well, I'm going to flip right back here. So typically we will use a worksheet that looks very similar to this, and we try to rate each task like by importance, difficulty, or frequency, and we will try to, if we can, go and do job shadowing to find that out. If there's any existing documentation that explains what a job is supposed to be doing, that can be a good start. And then also conducting interviews. So we'll just schedule, depending on how much time we have available and what we're going to be able to do, we'll schedule those opportunities to gather the information and then use this worksheet to organize it.
Another point I think that's interesting to make about task analysis worksheets is that this can be good pre-work too, where you can send this worksheet out to several different folks, have them fill it out, and then come together as a group and compare, because sometimes there's some discrepancy between what one group feels is important or one group feels is difficult. And this is a good way to gain consensus by having multiple viewpoints in the organization do the worksheet.
So another person has a question. Do you have a decision tree to help determine the best delivery method?
Delivery method for the final learning solution or the type of analysis? And really the answer is kind of no on both regards. Once we've done the analysis and we've looked at what the results are, it really is the instructional designers kind of reaching into their bag of tricks and figuring out what's going to be the best delivery method. And oftentimes it isn't going to be a single solution. When you're talking about behavior change or attitude change, those sorts of things, that comes with repeated practice and repeated exposure to the content. So almost always we're going to look for some sort of foundational learning, whether it be an e-learning course or an ILT session, and then we're going to think about how we reinforce that behavior moving forward. So what reinforcement techniques can we use? And you'll see some of those in the case studies that we're going to share here. But there's not a particular rubric or decision tree. It's just sort of figuring out what foundational learning we can provide and then how to carry them forward from there.
We also have a question on what is the average project time for the task analysis?
That's a really great question because I think it addresses a lot of the fear and concern people have about analysis, is that doing this is going to take a really long time. And that's just not true. I mean, if push came to shove, you could do this task analysis in a couple of days if you needed to. But that analysis would point you in such the right direction and really clarify the focus of the project. Often we will do an analysis and design phase over several weeks' time, several weeks to a month if we're kind of given our druthers and the project is large enough. But not all projects need that much. It really just depends on what the final outcome is going to be. If it's going to be a curriculum and there are lots of different audience types, et cetera, then obviously the analysis is going to take a longer time. But you can learn a lot in just a couple of dedicated days of perhaps task analysis, squeezing in several interviews and several focus groups. You can do that in a short period of time.
Great. Another person asked, what was the overall goal of the project shown in the sample task worksheet?
So the sample task worksheet is actually truly just an example to illustrate how a task analysis would go. So actually, we created that based off of a CRM system. If any of you are in sales training, you'll be familiar with like the Salesforce CRM. So we were creating an example of how to follow the process of working with leads in a CRM as an example. So this would be a great, this would be if it was for a software training of knowing what processes someone had to follow to use a software tool. And I did want to add in response to the earlier question about a decision tree, we certainly don't use a stock decision tree, but to kind of illustrate the process you might go through, we do have a PDF on our website, and maybe Jake, who's on the line, can provide a link to you guys, a template for planning your training program, and it kind of breaks down depending on the specific behavior change you're looking for, or different factors like that. It breaks down some of the different learning solutions you might use as part of a blended curriculum. It can be a good starting point at least.
We have a great question, a couple of other great questions. We have one question. I'm currently performing a task analysis for a curriculum I'm designing, but I'm finding lots of discrepancies in how the tasks are performed between the different subject matter experts. What approach would you take when they are performing tasks differently?
That's a really good question, and that's exactly what this kind of work will uncover for you, that the organization is doing things differently. So it depends on what your role is. So in some cases, you may just need to report back to the business unit, hey, you guys are all over the board and you are all doing it differently. And so we can't even move forward with this training until you've made some decisions about how to standardize your process. Now, you may be asked to participate in standardizing that process, and if that's the case, then it's going to be a matter of getting those folks in a room, over conference calls, et cetera, and coming to consensus about how it should be done. So it really just depends on where your role stops and starts. It could be as easy as turning it back to the business unit and sharing your findings and asking them to make decisions, or you may have to carry forward and help lead them and guide them to come to consensus.
Another question, any suggestions for analyzing the success of a program if there's no historical data? For example, a training program that has been ongoing for 3 years without any analysis.
Yeah, that's a really good one, and important because we're asked, right, to report on our ROI. How do we know this has been successful? So it's much easier if you're starting a new project to ask yourself up front, how are we going to determine if this has been successful? So we try to work with clients to make those determinations up front and figure out what metrics we're going to try to move the needle on. Is it number of support calls that we're receiving at the help center? Is it the strength of our pipeline that we want our salespeople to grow? Is it customer satisfaction measures on surveys that are coming in? We're going to really push them to find a metric that's appropriate and important to them, and then measure against it at a later point of time. It is very hard, as you've said, to jump in sort of midstream to a project that's 3 years down the road, where maybe we didn't have those metrics so clearly defined. How about if we take one more question, Tina, and then we'll move into some case studies and then take questions again at the end of those.
That actually wraps up most of the questions that have been asked. I do have maybe one last one. Are these skills part of the Lean Six Sigma concepts?
The analysis skills?
Yes.
Yeah. It's not a direct mirror, or it's not taken directly from that program, but there certainly is a lot of overlap. I mean, when you're trying to develop effective training, there's certainly some solid foundations that both of those programs carry, but our particular approach wasn't necessarily taken straight from a Six Sigma methodology.
Great questions, everybody. So actually, I'm going to turn it right back to Stephanie. I don't even know why I piped up. Stephanie's going to take us through our two case studies here.
Great. Thanks, Steve. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is take everything we've talked about so far and all of the great foundations Steve's laid and really talk about analysis in action. And the first case study I'm going to share with you is with a great partner of ours, Hilton Hotels. The business need they had was they had done some shop calls where they had anonymous callers calling into their front desk reservation agents. And what that shop call data revealed was that front desk reservationists were sort of inconsistently delivering the benefit messaging about that particular hotel's location. Oftentimes they were discounting the rates, and that was leading to their booking rates and their margins being too low. And they knew this was happening, but they didn't know exactly why it was happening. So we knew we needed to do some analysis. Okay. So the type of analysis we did was needs analysis to, again, figure out exactly what it is that was going on there and what the training need was. Just knowing that there were gaps didn't tell us exactly where the gaps were coming from or how we needed to address it. And we also wanted to do an audience analysis. We needed to know more about who those reservation agents were, what their work environment was like, what their internal and external challenges were that might be standing in the way of the performance outcomes they were looking for. So here's what we found. The first one was kind of a surprise. There actually was very little recollection of ever being trained. The role that we thought was doing the training in the organization really was not doing the training, and many of the staff had no recollection of ever receiving the required training on how to conduct that call. Probably at the root of that was because there really wasn't even a defined process for what a good call looked like. Reservationists were sort of doing the best that they could, but there wasn't a clear-cut process that they were supposed to be following. And beyond that, there wasn't a process for teaching them about the process because it didn't exist, or about their specific hotel benefits. Now, I wanted to share with you some of the tools that we used. I thought this would be helpful as you're thinking about conducting analysis inside of your own organizations. This is a copy of the interview guide that we used when we were interviewing general managers of the hotels. As you can see on the left-hand side is a place for the question that we asked, and on the right-hand side is where we documented all of our findings. One tip I have for you is to do this type of analysis in pairs, so you've got one person asking the questions and one person really being the scribe and documenting every bit of the information that's conveyed from those interviewees. That way it leaves one person free to really drive the conversation forward, be engaging, solicit the information, and then the other person is making sure that none of it is lost. Once you've gathered all of this great information, you're going to need to share it with folks. Your internal stakeholders are going to want to know what you found and what that means. So we always deliver to our clients an analysis report. In this, you'll see the sort of the upper icon there presents the finding, which is just the simple fact. There's a disconnect here between the call elements and the actual practice. We then share what the design implication is. And so we're going to design the training this way in order to address it. So in this particular case, the design implications based on that analysis were that we worked with the client to develop a firm call process where there hadn't been one before. We then designed some online training that unified and standardized that reservation training, and it could also be tracked because now it was going to live in their LMS as opposed to being a DVD and a one-on-one training as was their prior model. We decided to develop that empowered the right individual at the hotel. It didn't have to be a particular role as it had been designed before. We wanted each hotel to be able to select the appropriate person to conduct training, whether it be the GM or a supervisor or just a senior employee who was perhaps stellar at their job. And then we developed a toolkit of resources that was going to support that individual with them, the tools they needed to coach those new reservation agents. So here's some excerpts from that curriculum to show you what the end result looked like. We helped them develop a process. We actually broke it into 3 phases: ask, book, confirm, ABC, gave them a simple mnemonic to follow. And although it looks rather complex here, this is sort of just an if-then decision tree. If they say this, then you say this. But it, for the first time, mapped out exactly how that reservation call was supposed to go. In our job shadowing, we noticed that those reservation agents are extremely busy. They often have the phone ringing, they have people standing in front of them. It's a very hectic work environment and very easy to get lost. So we created these job aids to adhere directly to the computer screens that they're working at to constantly remind them of how that call is supposed to go. And then for that coach that's been designated within the hotel, we wanted to supply them with the tools they needed to take that new employee and really get them up and running and able to convey the benefits of the particular hotel that they're working at. So we created this coaching guide. It's full of resources, activities that they can use, discussion guides for what to talk to them about when they're meeting with them, etc. So any questions about that curriculum and how the end result was impacted by the findings of the analysis? Feel free to type those into the question box.
Love the coaching trail guide. Nicely done. I haven't gotten any questions yet.
Great. Well, if you do, go ahead and type them in, and Tina can take note, and if we've got a few minutes at the end, we can circle back and talk about this. In the meantime, I can move on to our second case study, which is in a completely different industry. This was done for Roche customer training. Roche develops large blood analyzer machines that go into hospitals and laboratory settings. So if you have your blood drawn, it moves through one of these machines to be analyzed and diagnose any conditions or diseases that may be there. So Roche is selling these into hospitals and labs and needs to train its customers on how to use this device. They had some challenges. The pre-work that they were currently using was being completed at about 40%. Roche really wanted its customers to feel confident and competent more quickly when using the machine. Their field application specialists, which are sort of their on-site trainers and support individuals, were spending a lot of time on-site with customers. And those field application specialists all had different approaches to the way they were delivering the field training. And so that, by extension, meant that customers were having different experiences depending on where they were. So here's the type of analysis we did. We did a needs analysis to fully understand the performance gaps. What was going on there? What were customers not getting that they needed? Where were they having challenges? We did an audience analysis to understand who these individuals were that were using this piece of equipment. The way the training was currently structured, it was sort of a one-size-fits-all approach, and we wanted to really dig in and understand who all the different personalities and roles associated with this job were. And then finally, we did a content analysis to understand all of the material that these learners needed to know and when they needed to know it. So, like I said, we did some content analysis where we looked through all of the material that existed, the DVD, the documentation, the training manual. We did observation of the 5-day in-person training to see how learners were learning in that environment, what was going well, what was challenging. We reviewed call center data to understand what the most frequently asked customer questions were. And then we held a lot of interviews and focus groups with lots of folks. So the internal stakeholders at Roche, we wanted to know what their perceptions of the training successes and challenges were. We wanted to hear from customers what they really wanted from training, and we wanted to hear from those current trainers about you know, what gaps they were seeing and what they felt could really help shore it up. So here's what we found. That pre-work DVD just had a ton of content, and we felt some folks were maybe getting lost in it. Similarly, that in-person training that was 5 days long still had so much information, probably more than could really be covered in a week. And it was having to cover a lot of just basic foundational information about the machine that limited then the amount of time that was left for hands-on training. What customers shared with us was that they really wanted a lot of training about daily operations and maintenance. We knew that the on-site training materials that the FASs were using needed to be flexible, they needed to be intuitive, and that somehow we needed to get a little bit better about really focusing in on specific job roles. So here's an excerpt from the curriculum design for this project, and it shares with you ultimately the learning goals. We wanted to shorten the time it took for customers to build competence in using the machine. We wanted to increase their confidence in basic troubleshooting and maintenance. We wanted to reduce the number of calls to Roche customer service, and we wanted to reduce the amount of time that the field application specialists had to spend on site. So how did that all come together? After doing all of that analysis, we developed a multi-phased training approach. That get ready for training in the blue there on the left was actually some pre-work. It was a pre-work e-learning course that went out, and that covered a lot of the foundational knowledge about the machine, sort of their orientation to the machine that wasn't getting saved now for that in-person course. And then we moved into the 5-day in-person instructor-led training that, by moving some of that foundational stuff out of the way, was able to be much more hands-on and much more focused on practice with the machine, which is really the most value that in-person training could offer. The on-site training was offered by the field application specialists, and we created a special tool for them that I'm going to show you that was standard across the board regardless of whether they were delivering the training, and it helped them deliver a consistent training experience. Then customers would go live with their machines at this point, and then depending on the job role they were in, certain audiences would receive some advanced training. So we went from a one-size-fits-all approach to an approach that recognized 5 different audiences: a key operator, a supervisor, an IT personnel, et cetera. And then we broke the training into different sections and phases. As you can see, there's really only one role that needed everything, and that was the key operator. Then other roles, depending on what they were doing and how they were handling the machine, the device, would participate in different parts of the training. Here's another sort of graphic showing the different types of tools that we created by phase. So in that pre-training, they're doing e-learning. In the basic operations and troubleshooting, it's an ILT session, so they're doing participant guides, facilitator guides. They have online checkpoints. They're using a simulator. And then I'm very excited to show you this FAS trainer app that was being used for the on-site training. Okay, so digging in a little bit to the actual solutions we created, once we discovered that it really wasn't appropriate to have the one-size-fits-all approach, we split the training into some role-specific tracks. So as soon as the person enters their pre-work, they choose how they interact with the device, and that essentially chooses their role for them. And then the training that's delivered is customized based on their job role. This is a reinforcement tool that we created for them to use to help solidify some of that foundational knowledge. So this is things like, this part of the device does this, or here's where it goes, or here's the order in which I do things. It's all of that sort of factual and process information. And again, by moving this out of that 5-day session, we could really free up more time to do the hands-on. All right, now I have alluded to this a couple of times, and it's the piece we're most excited about from this curriculum, but we developed an on-site facilitator app. So we heard again from facilitators that they were doing things differently in different locations, that the training was perhaps not consistent from location to location, and we really wanted to standardize that. So we created an app for them where they could identify who it was in the lab they were training by job role. So here we've said they're talking to supervisors, and if I were to click through this, it would say, all right, based on the fact that you're talking to supervisors, let's cover this information with them, and then it would walk me through step by step, just as a traditional facilitator guide would. So what were the business results, right? That's what we're here to talk about. What were the business results? So the pre-work completion rates rose from 40% to anywhere from 70 to 95%, depending on the customer account, which was just a really significant improvement. For one of the high-profile accounts who received this training, the client received 0 support calls, which was just phenomenal. They were able to close a new customer sale with a large national account based solely on the type of training they offered. Training was actually the competitive advantage for them. And as a really great benefit, because they've used now this sort of template as a model for other training curriculum, they've been able to use their design or reduce their development costs by 35% because they've rolled out this same model across additional products. As you can see here, we have, because of those results, we did submit this project for a number of awards, and we're very fortunate with our partner to have been recognized for the great work that went into it. Okay, great. So that's the end of our second case study here. We've got about 5 to 7 minutes, so if there are additional questions, we certainly have time to address them.
Yeah, I do have a couple questions here for you, Steph. Did we analyze the relationship building skills for creating best practices for field reps as part of our analysis for that case study you just presented?
So more of a soft skills kind of training?
Stephen says yes, that's correct. So you're on the right path.
So in this case, when you say field reps, it makes me think of sales reps, and I can see where a relationship building skills, especially for key account selling, is very, very important and something that a lot of companies are focusing on. For this, we were able to identify in the analysis that was not one of the core issues that they were having. The relationships side of what was happening with their field application specialists was great. In fact, they were spending maybe too much time building those relationships on site. What they needed was a way to try to reduce that hands-on time where the field application specialist was on site. So something like building a standardized app that guides that field application specialist through delivering exactly the right lesson that they need to deliver depending on the role that they're talking to, that really was what was needed to meet this particular business need. But I do appreciate it's very good to bring that up, and I think that especially with different types of sales training, that becomes even more important.
Great. Another question is the reinforcement tool based on spaced learning and boostering?
Yes, absolutely. So that reinforcement tool that I showed, the flashcard app, it's got a really great feature. I don't know if you noticed, I can click back to it here probably. Yeah. So along the bottom, you'll notice the color-coded bars, the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And what would happen is when a learner was going through the flashcard deck, when they answered a question, they had to rate themselves. Did I just guess that and really didn't know, and I really am only about a 1 in my confidence with that question? Or did I absolutely know this? I knew it cold, and they would rate themselves a 5. And the app would keep track of that rating, and over time, spaced over time, it would return those questions that they felt least confident about to them more frequently. So they would have the repetition of seeing them multiple times until eventually the learner was able to rate themselves as high confidence. And the goal ultimately was to see all blue across that dashboard there in the middle.
Another great question, were there any accountability expectations for the hospital staff members to use the reinforcement app or other tools?
Yeah, really great question. The answer is no, not by Roche itself. Now they may have had certain accountabilities from their management, their lab supervisors themselves, to use it, but it wasn't something that was being mandated by Roche. This was something that was used as a support tool and gave them everything that they needed, but really sort of the onus was on them to go back and use it. Okay, guys, we're getting down here. We've got just a couple minutes left to go, so I think we're going to go ahead and wrap it up. Steve, I'll turn it over to you at this point.
I'm going to turn it back. We will have time for a couple more questions after this little bit here, but before we finish the hour, I wanted Tina to be able to talk about our next webinar that we have coming up.
Yeah. After this webinar, you can expect an email from me. Like I said, I will have the recording, and then we'll also be sending out an invitation to our next webinar on the session resources. We can give this as a private offering for your organization, so if you felt like this information was useful and you want to get others in your organization on board with this methodology and approach, feel free to reach out to me. Our next webinar then is going to be on Agile Learning Design, a practical perspective. It's presented by Jennifer Bertram here. She's our Director of Instructional Design at Bottom Line Performance. That's going to be on Wednesday, April 20th at 1 p.m. Eastern. Be sure to watch for your email for that one, as well as the future webinars coming up every other month.
Thank you, Tina. And I wanted to now, if there were any other questions now, we have 2 minutes left, and we can certainly stay a few minutes after if you want to hang out and have your question answered. I figure we can just continue with the Q&A.
I noticed in the question box, there were several questions about the theme that was selected for the Hilton project and whether that was something that was already in play for them or if they'd asked for that theme. And the answer there is that's something we came up with together. This was one particular brand within Hilton Hotels, the Homewood Suites brand, and so together with them, we sort of brainstormed sort of a fun theme, a journey that the employee would go on. The e-learning course that we set up for them was set up with the sort of the story that they needed to learn this new process, and if they learned it successfully, that they were going to win a trip to this fantastic fictional location to help them open a new hotel as a mentor there. And so we just based the whole curriculum around this fun journey that they were on. So that was a decision we made together. Certainly other clients already have themes, aesthetics that they're already working with, and it's important to maintain that. And so it just really depends on what's important for each project.
Well, great, everyone. Thanks again for joining us. You'll see our contact information here. Feel free to drop us an email or give us a ring. And, of course, visit us at bottomlineperformance.com. Everybody have a great day.